The desert wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain as Maria Esperanza guided her horse through the narrow canyon pass. The Apache woman had learned these trails from her grandmother, every rock formation and hidden water source mapped in her memory like the lines on her weathered hands. Tonight, something felt different about the familiar landscape. The usual night sounds seemed muted, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. She had been returning from the trading post in Tombstone when the first gunshot echoed off the canyon walls. Maria pulled her mare to a stop, her hand instinctively moving to the Winchester rifle secured to her saddle. In these borderlands between Arizona Territory and Mexico, gunfire rarely meant anything good for travelers caught in the open. The second shot came from somewhere ahead, followed by the distinctive crack of a different weapon. A gun battle, then. Maria's first instinct was to turn around and find another route home to her small ranch. At 19 years old, she had already seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. But something made her hesitate. The shooting had stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving only an eerie silence that felt heavier than the gunfire itself. Her mare snorted nervously, picking up on her rider's tension. Maria stroked the animal's neck, making her decision. She could not simply ride away without knowing if someone lay wounded in the darkness ahead. It went against everything her grandmother had taught her about helping those in need, regardless of their skin color or the language they spoke. Moving cautiously, Maria guided her horse around a bend in the canyon where the walls opened into a small clearing. Moonlight filtered through thin clouds, casting ghostly shadows across the desert floor. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then her trained eyes picked out the dark shapes scattered across the ground near a cluster of large boulders. 3 men lay motionless in the dirt, their bodies twisted at unnatural angles. Maria approached slowly, her rifle ready, but her finger off the trigger. She had learned long ago that hasty actions in situations like this usually led to more bloodshed. As she drew closer, the metallic smell of blood mixed with the desert air. The first 2 men were clearly Mexican bandits, their ammunition belts and distinctive clothing marking them as riders who had crossed the border looking for easy targets. Both were beyond help, their weapons scattered nearby where they had fallen. But it was the third figure that made Maria dismount quickly and hurry forward. A cowboy lay propped against a boulder, his hat fallen beside him and his shirt soaked with blood. His breathing was shallow but steady, and in the pale moonlight Maria could see that he was conscious but struggling to stay alert. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sun-weathered features and calloused hands that spoke of long days working cattle. As she knelt beside him, the wounded man's eyes focused on her with obvious effort. His hand moved weakly toward his holster, but he was too weak to draw his weapon. Maria gently pushed his hand away and began examining his wounds by touch, her fingers finding 2 bullet holes in his side and another in his shoulder. "Easy, cowboy," she whispered in English, keeping her voice low and calm. "I am not here to hurt you." The man studied her face in the dim light, taking in her Apache features and the concern in her dark eyes. He had expected death to come for him in this lonely place, not rescue from an Indian woman who spoke perfect English with only the slightest accent. "Bandits," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "Jumped me at the water hole. Got 2 of them, but the third one got away after putting these holes in me." Maria nodded, understanding the situation. These borderlands attracted all kinds of desperate men, and travelers who rode alone often found themselves targets of opportunity. The fact that this cowboy had managed to kill 2 armed bandits while wounded spoke well of his fighting ability, but he would not survive much longer without medical attention. "What is your name?" she asked while examining the makeshift bandage he had managed to apply to his side. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped, and she could tell he had lost quite a bit of blood already. "Jake Morrison," he replied, wincing as she touched the wound on his shoulder. I work for the Bar X Ranch about 10 miles south of here. Was heading back from Tucson when this happened. Maria knew of the Bar X Ranch. It was owned by Samuel Henderson, one of the few ranchers in the area who treated his workers fairly and minded his own business when it came to the local Apache communities. That knowledge influenced her next decision. My name is Maria Esperanza, she said, making up her mind. I am going to help you, but you must do exactly as I say. Can you do that? Jake Morrison looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. In his experience, most Apache people avoided contact with white settlers, especially wounded ones who might bring trouble. But something in this woman's manner convinced him that she meant what she said. Yes, ma'am, he replied. I appreciate any help you can give. Maria quickly assessed their situation. The surviving bandit could return with reinforcements, making this clearing extremely dangerous. Jake was too weak to ride on his own, but she could not leave him here to die. The nearest doctor was in Tombstone, more than a day's hard ride away. However, Maria knew of a place much closer where she could treat his wounds and keep him hidden until he was strong enough to travel. Listen carefully, she said, her voice urgent but controlled. There is an old Apache camp about 2 miles from here, hidden in a box canyon that the bandits do not know about. I can get you there and treat your wounds, but the ride will be difficult. Do you think you can stay conscious long enough? Jake considered her words. He had heard stories about Apache hospitality, both good and bad, but he was in no position to be particular about his rescuer's heritage. Death was the only alternative to trusting this woman, and something about her competent manner gave him confidence. I'll do my best, he said, but I should warn you that helping me might bring you trouble. If that third bandit is still around, he might follow us. Maria had already considered that possibility. Let him try, she said with quiet confidence. These canyons have been my people's stronghold for generations. Any bandits foolish enough to follow us will find more trouble than they bargained for. She moved quickly to prepare Jake for transport, using strips torn from her own shirt to create better bandages for his wounds. The bleeding had slowed considerably, but she knew that the rough ride ahead could start it again. She also retrieved Jake's weapons and ammunition, securing them on her horse along with the supplies from his own mount, which she found grazing nervously about 50 yards away. We need to move now, Maria said, helping Jake to his feet. Can you mount your horse with help? The effort of standing made Jake dizzy, and he swayed on his feet for a moment before steadying himself against the boulder. I think so, he said, though his voice was weaker than before. Maria led Jake's horse closer and helped him into the saddle, securing his feet in the stirrups and tying a rope around his waist to keep him from falling if he lost consciousness. She then mounted her own horse and took the lead rope of Jake's mount. Hold on to the saddle horn and try to stay upright, she instructed. If you feel yourself falling, call out and I will stop. The journey to the hidden canyon was a nightmare of pain and endurance for Jake Morrison. Every step of his horse sent jolts of agony through his wounds, and several times he nearly passed out from the combination of blood loss and jarring movement. But each time he felt himself slipping away, Maria's calm voice would call out encouragement or warning, keeping him focused on staying in the saddle. Maria chose her route carefully, avoiding the main trails where bandits or other travelers might spot them. She led them through narrow washes and over rocky ground that would be difficult to track, constantly watching and listening for signs of pursuit. Her Apache training served her well as she guided them through terrain that would have been impossible for most people to navigate in the darkness. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, they reached the entrance to the box canyon that Maria had mentioned. Hidden behind a screen of cottonwood trees and accessible only through a narrow gap between towering rock walls, the old camp had been abandoned for several years, but remained perfectly concealed from casual observation. Inside the canyon, a small spring provided fresh water, and the remains of traditional Apache shelters offered some protection from the elements. Maria had used this place before as a refuge during hunting trips, and she kept basic supplies cached here in case of emergencies. She helped Jake down from his horse and half-carried him to a sheltered spot near the spring where she could work on his wounds properly. By now, he was barely conscious and running a fever from infection that was already setting in. Maria knew she would need to work fast if she was going to save his life. Using water from the spring and supplies from her cache, Maria cleaned Jake's wounds as thoroughly as possible by firelight. The bullet in his shoulder had passed completely through, but the two in his side were still lodged against his ribs. She would need to remove them before infection could spread further. "Keep quiet," she whispered as she prepared her grandmother's surgical tools for the delicate work ahead. "This is going to hurt, but I must get those bullets out." Jake Morrison gripped a piece of leather between his teeth and tried to prepare himself for what was coming. As Maria began her careful work beneath the desert stars, he found himself marveling at the strange turn his life had taken. This morning, he had been just another cowboy heading home from a supply run. Tonight, his life was in the hands of an Apache woman whose skill with a knife might be the only thing standing between him and death. The operation took most of the night, with Maria working by firelight to extract the bullets and clean the wounds. Jake passed out several times from the pain, which actually made her job easier. By dawn, she had removed both bullets and sewn up the wounds with sinew thread, applying poultices made from desert plants that would fight infection and promote healing. As the sun rose over the canyon rim, painting the rock walls in shades of gold and red, Maria finally allowed herself to rest. Jake Morrison was alive, though still very weak and feverish. Whether he would survive the next few days depended on his body's ability to fight off infection and recover from the significant blood loss. Maria settled back against a rock wall and watched her patient sleep. She had committed herself to saving this stranger's life, but she knew that their troubles were just beginning. The third bandit might still be out there, and other dangers lurked in these borderlands for a wounded white man and the Apache woman who had chosen to help him. But as she looked at Jake's peaceful face in the morning light, Maria felt certain she had made the right choice. Her grandmother had always said that the measure of a person's character could be found in how they treated those who could do nothing for them in return. Whatever happened next, Maria Esperanza would not abandon the wounded cowboy who had trusted her with his life beneath the desert stars. 3 days passed in the hidden canyon before Jake Morrison opened his eyes without fever clouding his vision. Maria had barely slept during that time, constantly checking his wounds for signs of infection and forcing small amounts of medicinal tea between his lips when he was conscious enough to swallow. The infection had peaked on the second night, when Jake's temperature soared so high that Maria feared she might lose him despite all her efforts. She had spent hours applying cool, wet cloths to his burning skin and praying to both her Apache ancestors and the Christian God her missionary teachers had told her about. By the third morning, the fever finally broke, leaving Jake weak but clear-headed for the first time since the shooting. "Water," he croaked, his voice barely audible in the quiet canyon. Maria quickly brought him a cup made from a hollowed gourd, supporting his head as he drank slowly. The cool spring water felt like heaven against his parched throat, and he managed several small sips before she gently lowered his head back to the improvised pillow she had made from her spare clothing. "How long?" Jake asked, trying to piece together his scattered memories of the past few days. 3 days since I brought you here," Maria replied, checking the bandages on his shoulder wound. "The infection was very bad, but your body is strong. You are going to live." Jake tried to sit up, but immediately felt dizzy and had to lie back down. "My horse? My gear? Both are safe. Your horse is with mine in the grass near the spring. I saved everything from your saddlebags." Maria moved to tend the small fire she kept burning day and night, both for cooking and to have hot water ready for medical care. For the first time since awakening, Jake took a careful look around their shelter. Maria had constructed a lean-to using branches and his canvas tarp, creating a space that was both hidden from view and protected from the elements. His saddle and equipment were neatly arranged nearby, and he could see both horses grazing contentedly in a patch of grass near the canyon wall. "You saved my life," he said simply, watching Maria prepare what looked like another dose of the bitter medicine she had been giving him. "Anyone would have done the same," Maria replied, though they both knew that was not true. Many people would have ridden away rather than risk their own safety for a stranger. Jake studied her face as she worked. Maria Esperanza was beautiful, but in a way that spoke of strength and intelligence rather than delicate features. Her long black hair was braided with small pieces of silver, and she moved with the confident grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness. Everything about her suggested competence and self-reliance. "Why did you help me?" Jake asked. "Most Apache folks around here keep to themselves, especially when white folks are involved." Maria paused in her work, considering how to answer. "My grandmother taught me that a person's worth has nothing to do with the color of their skin or the language they speak," she said finally. "She said that the spirits judge us by our actions, not our heritage. When I saw you bleeding under the stars, I saw a human being who needed help. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was. She died 2 years ago. But I try to live by the things she taught me." Maria brought him the medicine, a tea made from willow bark and other plants that would reduce pain and continue fighting infection. "Drink all of it even though it tastes terrible." Jake managed to get the bitter liquid down, making a face at the taste. "Where did you learn to remove bullets and sew up wounds like you did? That was better than some doctors I have seen." "My grandmother learned from a medicine woman when she was young, and she taught me. But I also spent 2 years at the mission school in Tucson before my father decided I had learned enough about the white man's ways." Maria settled back against her own bedroll, finally allowing herself to relax slightly now that her patient was clearly recovering. "What made your father change his mind about school?" Maria's expression darkened slightly. "The teachers wanted me to forget everything about being Apache. They said my people's ways were savage and that I should be grateful to learn civilized behavior. When I refused to stop speaking my language or practicing our traditions, they decided I was a bad influence on the other students." Jake could hear the old hurt in her voice, and it stirred something protective in his chest. He had known plenty of people who looked down on Indians, and it had never sat right with him. "Their loss," he said quietly. "If they could not see your value, they were not worth learning from anyway." Maria looked surprised by his response. In her experience, most white men either agreed with the mission teachers or simply did not care about the struggles of Apache people. "You do not think my people's ways are savage?" "I think different people have different ways of living, and most of them work just fine for the people who practice them," Jake replied. "I have known some savage white men and some honorable Indians, and plenty of folks who were the opposite of what you might expect." This answer seemed to satisfy Maria, and some of the tension left her shoulders. "Tell me about your work at the Bar X Ranch. Samuel Henderson is known as a fair man among my people." Jake nodded, grateful for the change of subject. "Mr. Henderson is decent to work for, pays fair wages, and does not ask questions about a man's past as long as he does his job well. I have been there about 8 months now working cattle and doing ranch maintenance." "Where did you come from before that?" "Texas originally, but I have been drifting for several years. Worked ranches and cattle drives all over the Southwest." Jake paused, then decided to be honest. "I was in the Army for a while, but that did not work out." Maria nodded without judgment. Many men in this territory had complicated pasts that they preferred not to discuss in detail. "Do you plan to stay at the Bar X Ranch?" "That depends," Jake said, wincing as he shifted position. Mr. Henderson needed someone for a long-term position, and I was getting tired of moving around so much. This country grows on a person after a while. Over the next 2 days, Jake grew stronger and was able to sit up for longer periods without becoming dizzy. Maria continued to care for his wounds and prepare meals from the supplies they had between them. She proved to be an excellent cook, able to create satisfying meals from simple ingredients supplemented with edible plants she gathered in the canyon. They talked frequently during Jake's recovery, sharing stories about their very different upbringings and experiences. Maria told him about life in the Apache community where she had been raised, describing traditions and customs that fascinated Jake with their connection to the natural world. In return, he shared stories from his travels throughout the Southwest and his work on various ranches and cattle drives. Despite their different backgrounds, they found they had much in common. Both were essentially alone in the world, having lost family members to disease or violence. Both valued honesty and hard work over social status or wealth, and both had learned to be self-reliant in a harsh land that offered little mercy to the unprepared or foolish. "What will you do when you are well enough to leave here?" Maria asked on the 5th day as she changed the bandages on Jake's shoulder wound. The healing was progressing well, with no signs of renewed infection. "Report to Mr. Henderson, I suppose. Let him know what happened and get back to work if he will have me." Jake paused, then looked directly at her. "What about you? Will you go back to your ranch?" Maria nodded. "I have cattle and horses that need tending and a small garden that will be overrun with weeds by now. It is not much, but it is mine." "How does a young woman come to own her own ranch in this country?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. "When my grandmother died, she left me some money she had saved and a small piece of land that her husband bought many years ago. It is not large, only 160 acres, but it has good water and enough grass for a modest herd." Maria's voice held quiet pride as she described her property. "That sounds like a good start. Are you planning to expand the operation?" "If I can. The problem is that a woman alone, especially an Apache woman, faces many challenges in business dealings. Some people refuse to deal with me at all, while others think they can cheat me because I have no male relatives to stand behind me." Jake frowned at this information. He had not thought much about the particular difficulties that someone in Maria's situation would face, but he could easily imagine the prejudice and condescension she must encounter regularly. "That does not seem right," he said. "If you know cattle and horses, your heritage should not matter to anyone." "The world does not always work the way it should," Maria replied with a slight smile. "But I manage well enough. My grandmother taught me to be suspicious of anyone who offers deals that seem too good to be true, and I have learned to judge people by their actions rather than their words." On the morning of the 6th day, Jake was able to stand and walk around the camp without assistance, though he still tired easily and his wounds remained tender. Maria judged that he was strong enough to attempt the journey back to civilization, but she was reluctant to see their time together end. "The bandits have had plenty of time to give up and move on," she said as they discussed travel plans. "But we should still be careful about the route we take back to the main trails." "About that," Jake said, seeming to gather his courage for something, "I have been thinking about what you said regarding the challenges you face with your ranch operation." Maria looked at him curiously, unsure where this conversation was leading. "If you were willing to consider it," Jake continued, "I might be able to help with some of those challenges. Mr. Henderson knows me as an honest worker, and if I vouched for you as a reliable partner in cattle deals, he would listen. Other ranchers in the area respect his judgment." Maria studied Jake's face, trying to determine his motives. "Why would you do that? You barely know me. I know that you saved my life when you could have ridden away safely. I know that you are skilled, intelligent, and honest, and I know that you deserve the same opportunities as anyone else in this business." Jake met her gaze steadily. "Besides, I have been thinking that maybe it is time I stopped drifting and found a place to settle down. Your ranch sounds like it might have potential for someone willing to work hard." The proposition surprised Maria, but she found herself seriously considering it. Having a partner, especially a man who could handle the social aspects of business that were difficult for her, would definitely help her expand her operation. And Jake had proven himself to be trustworthy and competent during their time together. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked carefully. "A business partnership. I could invest my savings in expanding your herd and improving the ranch facilities. In exchange, I would receive a percentage of the profits and a place to live and work. All business decisions would be made together, as equal partners." Maria thought about this proposal for several minutes while she finished packing their gear. It was a significant risk to tie her future to someone she had known for less than a week, but something about Jake Morrison inspired confidence. He had been honest with her about his background, respectful of her knowledge and abilities, and grateful without being servile about the help she had given him. "I would need to see your ranch and get a better understanding of the operation before making any commitment," Jake added, perhaps sensing her hesitation. "And you would certainly want to check my references with Mr. Henderson before trusting me with your livelihood." "That seems reasonable," Maria agreed. "Would you be willing to ride out to my place before reporting back to the Bar X Ranch? It is only a few miles out of your way." "I would be honored to," Jake replied. As they prepared to leave the hidden canyon that had been their refuge for nearly a week, both Maria and Jake felt a sense of anticipation about what the future might hold. The bond forged between them during his recovery was stronger than either had expected, built on mutual respect and shared hardship. Maria extinguished their fire and scattered the ashes, while Jake saddled both horses with movements that were still somewhat stiff, but much improved from a few days earlier. The morning air was crisp and clear, perfect for traveling, and both horses seemed eager to be moving again after their extended rest. "Ready?" Maria asked, mounting her mare with fluid grace. Jake pulled himself into his saddle more carefully, but without the struggle that such movements had required just yesterday. "Ready. Lead the way, partner." As they rode out of the box canyon and back into the wider desert landscape, neither of them noticed the lone figure watching from a distant ridge. The third bandit had indeed returned to the area, and he had been searching patiently for any sign of the cowboy who had killed his companions. Today, his patience had finally been rewarded. The journey to Maria's ranch took them through a series of mesas and valleys that showcased the rugged beauty of the Arizona territory. Jake found himself impressed by the variety of the landscape and the abundance of water sources that Maria seemed to know by instinct. Her knowledge of the country was remarkable, and she guided them along paths that offered both good footing for the horses and natural cover from observation. They had been traveling for about 3 hours when Maria suddenly held up her hand, signaling Jake to stop. She sat perfectly still on her horse, head tilted slightly as she listened to something he could not hear. After a moment, she turned to him with a concerned expression. "Someone is following us," she said quietly. "About a half-mile behind, trying to stay out of sight but not succeeding completely." Jake felt his hand move instinctively toward his holster. "The third bandit?" "Most likely. He has been very patient, but not quite skilled enough to track Apache style without being detected." Maria studied the terrain ahead, clearly formulating a plan. "There is a place about a mile from here where we can turn the tables on him." "What do you have in mind?" "A narrow pass between 2 large rock formations. If we can get him to follow us through it, we can trap him in the canyon beyond. But it will require perfect timing and coordination between us." Jake nodded, trusting her judgment completely. "Tell me what you need me to do." Maria outlined her strategy as they continued riding toward the location she had described. The plan was simple but dangerous, requiring Jake to act as bait while she positioned herself for an ambush. If either of them made a mistake in timing or execution, the pursuing bandit might escape or, worse, kill one or both of them. "Are you sure you are strong enough for this?" Maria asked as they approached the rock formation she had mentioned. "Your wounds are still healing, and if something goes wrong, you might need to move quickly." "I am strong enough," Jake replied firmly. "Besides, if we do not deal with this problem now, he will just follow us to your ranch and create even more danger later." The rock formations rose dramatically from the desert floor, creating a natural gateway that was barely wide enough for two horses to pass through side by side. Beyond the gap, a small box canyon offered the perfect trap for an unwary pursuer. Maria positioned herself among the rocks on the left side of the pass, while Jake continued through the gap and into the canyon. The waiting seemed to stretch on forever, though it was probably only 10 minutes before they heard the sound of a horse approaching the pass. Maria remained perfectly still, her rifle ready and her breathing controlled. From her position, she could see Jake waiting in the canyon, appearing relaxed and unaware of any danger, but actually coiled and ready for action. The bandit approached the pass cautiously, clearly suspicious, but apparently driven by the desire for revenge against the man who had killed his companions. He was a thin, wiry man with cruel eyes and the nervous movements of someone accustomed to violence. His horse was lathered with sweat from pushing hard to catch up with his quarry. As the bandit entered the narrow pass, Maria could see him scanning the rocks above for signs of an ambush. He was experienced enough to know that the location was perfect for a trap, but his eagerness for vengeance overcame his natural caution. When he spotted Jake in the canyon beyond, apparently resting his horse near a small pool of water, greed and anger took over completely. The bandit spurred his horse forward through the pass, raising his rifle as he cleared the gap and entered the canyon. "Morrison!" he shouted. "Time to pay for killing my friends!" Jake spun around in his saddle, appearing startled by the sudden appearance of his pursuer. In reality, he had been waiting for exactly this moment, and his hand was already moving toward his weapon as he turned. The bandit's shot echoed off the canyon walls, but his aim was hurried and the bullet went wide, chipping rock from the wall behind Jake's position. Before the man could work the action of his rifle for a second shot, Jake had drawn his pistol and returned fire, his bullet catching the bandit in the chest and knocking him from his horse. At the same moment, Maria emerged from her hiding place, with her rifle trained on the fallen man, ready to provide backup if needed. But Jake's shot had been accurate and final. The bandit lay motionless in the dirt, his weapon fallen beside him, and his horse nervously dancing away from the scene. "Is he dead?" Maria called out, keeping her rifle ready just in case. Jake dismounted carefully and approached the fallen bandit, his gun still drawn. After a moment, he nodded. "He is finished. No more worries from this one." Maria rode into the canyon and dismounted beside Jake, her relief evident. "That was well done. Your aim is very good for a man who was shot 3 times less than a week ago." "I had good medical care," Jake replied with a slight smile. "And excellent tactical support." They searched the bandit's body and found a considerable amount of money, probably stolen from previous victims. There was also a letter that identified the man as Carlos Mendez, wanted by both American and Mexican authorities for robbery and murder. The reward money alone would be substantial, but more importantly, his death removed a dangerous criminal from the borderlands. "We should report this to the sheriff in Tombstone," Maria said as they prepared to resume their journey. "The reward money will be useful, and it will clear up any questions about what happened to these bandits." "Agreed. But first, I would like to see this ranch of yours." They rode on through the afternoon, with Maria pointing out various features of the landscape and explaining how the local Apache communities had traditionally used different areas for hunting, gathering, and seasonal camps. Jake found her knowledge fascinating and began to understand how deeply connected she was to this land. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, they topped a low ridge, and Maria gestured toward a small valley spread out below them. "There it is," she said with obvious pride. "The Esperanza Ranch." Jake studied the property carefully, his experienced eye taking in the layout and condition of the facilities. The main house was small but well-maintained, built of adobe with a red tile roof that suggested Mexican influence. Several outbuildings included a barn, a workshop, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse for hired help. The real treasure, however, was the land itself. A year-round creek meandered through the center of the valley, providing reliable water for both livestock and irrigation. The grass was thick and nutritious, perfect for cattle, and the valley was partially enclosed by natural rock walls that would make it easy to control livestock movement. "This is beautiful country," Jake said sincerely. "Your grandmother chose well when she acquired this land." "She always said that water was more valuable than gold in this territory," Maria replied. "That creek has never failed, even in the driest years." As they rode down into the valley, Jake could see cattle grazing peacefully near the water. Maria's herd was small but appeared to be healthy and well cared for. Several horses in a nearby pasture raised their heads to watch the approaching riders, and Jake noted their good condition and alert manner. "How many head of cattle do you have?" he asked. 47 at last count, plus 12 horses and a small flock of chickens." Maria's tone was matter-of-fact, but Jake could hear the pride underneath. "It is not a large operation, but it provides a decent living." Jake was impressed. For a woman working alone, Maria had accomplished something remarkable in building and maintaining a successful ranch operation. The facilities were in excellent repair, the livestock appeared healthy and well-managed, and the land itself was some of the best he had seen in the territory. They dismounted at the main house, and Maria led him inside to see the living quarters. The interior was simply furnished, but comfortable, with handmade furniture that showed both Apache and Mexican influences. Everything was scrupulously clean and well-organized, giving the impression of a home that was lived in and cared for, rather than merely occupied. "I can offer you a meal and a place to sleep tonight," Maria said as she began preparations for dinner. "Tomorrow we can ride out, and I can show you the rest of the property in detail." "That sounds perfect," Jake replied. "I want to get a good understanding of the operation before we discuss any partnership arrangements." Over dinner, Maria explained her plans for expanding the ranch. She wanted to increase the size of her herd gradually, improve the breeding stock by purchasing a quality bull, and build additional facilities to support a larger operation. Her ideas were practical and well thought out, demonstrating both ambition and realistic expectations. "What about markets for your cattle?" Jake asked. "Who do you sell to currently?" "There is a cattle buyer in Tucson who gives fair prices, and sometimes I can sell directly to the Army for their beef contracts. The problem is that I usually have to accept lower prices than the big ranchers because I cannot deliver large quantities on a regular schedule." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That is where a partnership might really help. With more capital to expand the herd and someone to help with the business negotiations, you could probably command much better prices." They talked long into the evening, discussing the practical aspects of ranch management and the potential for growth. Jake's experience with larger operations complemented Maria's intimate knowledge of the local conditions and her proven ability to manage resources efficiently. The next morning, they spent several hours touring the property on horseback. Jake examined the pastures, water sources, and facilities with the careful attention of someone considering a significant investment. Everything he saw confirmed his initial impression that Maria had built something valuable and sustainable. "I have a proposition for you," Jake said as they sat beside the creek during their midday break. "Based on what I have seen here, I think we could build something really impressive together." Maria listened carefully as Jake outlined his ideas for their partnership. He proposed to invest his savings from 8 years of ranch work, along with his labor and business connections, in exchange for a 40% share of the expanded operation. Maria would retain majority ownership while gaining the capital and assistance needed to achieve her growth plans. The key advantage, Jake explained, is that we would each bring different strengths to the partnership. You know this land and these local conditions better than anyone. I have connections with other ranchers and buyers that could help us get better prices and access to quality breeding stock. What about living arrangements? Maria asked. This house is comfortable for one person, but it would be cramped for two. We could build a second house or add rooms to this one, whatever you prefer. Jake paused, then added, I want to be clear that this would be a business partnership. I am not suggesting anything inappropriate about our personal arrangement. Maria appreciated his directness on this sensitive topic. I understand, and I agree that business and personal matters should be kept separate, at least until we know each other much better. They spent the rest of the afternoon working out the details of their proposed partnership, including profit-sharing arrangements, decision-making responsibilities, and plans for expansion. By evening, they had reached an agreement that both felt was fair and beneficial. There is one more thing we should discuss, Maria said as they prepared supper together. Some people in this territory will not approve of an Apache woman and a white man working together as partners. We may face prejudice and hostility from various sources. Jake had been thinking about this issue as well. That is probably true, but I believe most reasonable people will judge us by our results rather than our heritage, and anyone who wants to cause trouble over it will find that we can handle ourselves just fine. Maria smiled at his confident tone. You are not worried about what people might say? I stopped worrying about other people's opinions when I decided to make my own way in the world, Jake replied. As long as we treat each other with respect and run an honest operation, we have nothing to apologize for. A month later, Jake Morrison and Maria Esperanza rode into Tombstone together to register their partnership with the territorial government and collect the reward money for Carlos Mendez. The sight of an Apache woman and a white cowboy conducting business as equals caused considerable comment among the townspeople, but they handled the attention with quiet dignity and professional competence. Samuel Henderson, Jake's former boss, was among the first to congratulate them on their new venture. I always knew Morrison was a good judge of character, he told anyone who would listen. If he says Maria Esperanza is a reliable partner, that is good enough for me. Word of their partnership spread quickly through the ranching community, and within a few months, they were receiving invitations to cattle auctions and social gatherings that had previously been closed to Maria. Some people remained hostile or suspicious, but many others were willing to judge the partnership by its results. Those results were impressive. By the end of their first year together, the Esperanza Ranch had doubled its cattle herd and shown a profit that exceeded both partners' expectations. Maria's knowledge of the land combined with Jake's business connections had created opportunities that neither could have achieved alone. More importantly, the partnership had evolved into a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared goals. They had faced various challenges together, from difficult weather to hostile neighbors, and had proven that they could rely on each other completely. As they sat on the porch of their expanded house one evening, watching their cattle graze in the valley below, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed since that night when she found a wounded cowboy bleeding beneath the desert stars. "Do you ever regret your decision to help me that night?" Jake asked, as if reading her thoughts. Maria considered the question seriously before answering. "Never," she said firmly. "It was the best decision I ever made." "Keep quiet," she whispered to herself, remembering her grandmother's advice about the importance of listening to one's inner wisdom. Sometimes the most important choices in life came disguised as simple acts of human kindness. In saving Jake Morrison's life, Maria Esperanza had found something she had not even known she was looking for, a true partner who valued her exactly as she was. Their success had become legendary in the territory, proof that cooperation and mutual respect could overcome the prejudices and divisions that too often separated people. The Esperanza Ranch stood as a symbol of what was possible when good people chose to work together rather than against each other, building something beautiful and lasting in the harsh but magnificent landscape of the American Southwest.